Hey everyone, this is Brian Ferguson. I know if you're watching this that you're enjoying the Bumps and Thumps podcast. In order to continue the podcast and get the guests on that everyone wants to hear about, we need support from listeners like you. There are a few ways you can do this. One is going to anchor.fm, which will be on the bottom of your screen here, and click the support button. There you can make a monthly contribution to support the podcast. There's also, we have a Teespring store. We have a link down at the bottom of the screen as well for that. And we have products such as t-shirts like this one I'm wearing, backpacks, glassware, and other great items for you to purchase. Those purchases go directly back into the podcast and get on guests that require financial compensation. Thank you again for your support. Go to those websites and support our podcast, and we will continue to bring the guests that you want to hear about, past and present. And thank you for your support and enjoy the podcast. Thank you for joining another edition of Bumps and Thumps, the talk of wrestling. I'm Brian Ferguson. My guest today has authored or co-authored 17 books and is the producer of the slamwrestling.net website. He's also been honored by the Cauliflower Alley Club with the James C. Melby Historian Award in 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Greg Oliver. Greg, thanks for coming on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on the show, Brian.
I really appreciate it. Reached out to you and it was pretty easy. I did not realize, I just started following your work a few months back. I didn't realize that you were in Canada. So that's pretty interesting. So,
well, that's the thing about the internet though, right? It doesn't really matter. You can do the work from anywhere.
You can now, definitely.
I just got a new book from Scott Teal and his Crowbar Press, and the guy who wrote about the history of Amarillo, Texas, is in England. So
there you go.
It doesn't matter anymore.
It doesn't. And I'm sure with COVID, that helped a lot of people. That's why I started doing this, because of COVID, being at home. So it does its wonders, the internet. So, all right, let's talk a little bit. Growing up, you born and raised in Canada. Can we talk a little bit about your childhood and your schooling and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's I mean, plain and simple, Hulkamania ran wild on me. I was the right age, in 1984 and 1985. I was, 13, 14, and everybody was talking about it. So I became a fan through that. And I know I missed out on some good stuff that was in and around Toronto. I grew up in Kitchener, which is about an hour from Toronto. But, it coincided with us getting an Apple IIe computer. Oh. And we got a program called, it was a desktop publishing program. And, my brother and I started playing around. The next thing you knew, we did a little newsletter, and it was a way for us to capitalize on pro wrestling. Of course, we had no clue there were other newsletters out there at that point. We're just, high school or grade school kids and just trying to have some fun and really enjoying the wrestling. It's embarrassing looking back at those early editions of the Canadian Wrestling Report because they were so kayfabe and so goofy. But yet, you had to start somewhere, right?
Right.
Here I am 35 years later, which is terrifying. And, Canada was a good market, but it wasn't the same market, right? Because we didn't get everything they did in the US. We didn't get WTBS for years. As a good example, WWF would come regularly to Toronto, which was a good thing. And they'd often do the little circuit, including coming to Kitchener, where I grew up. So it's, and then we got occasional other shows, right? We had BCTV, which was out of British Columbia. They did the Vancouver All-Star Wrestling.
Okay.
Again, just the same as how ESPN started in 81 or was that 79? But TSN was our national sports broadcaster. That started in 84. And they had pro wrestling on from the start. It was AWA, and then they added Stampede, and there was another show called Pro Wrestling Plus that was hosted by Ed Whalen, the guy who did Stampede Wrestling. And, he promoted all kinds of different wrestling, and he plugged my newsletter a few times. So that's how I ended up with, a couple of hundred subscribers across the country. So I owe a lot to Ed Whalen and to Norm DaCosta and the Toronto Star, who also gave me a number of plugs.
That's very interesting. You mentioned the AWA. I'm from Wisconsin originally. I was born and raised there, so I saw a lot of the AWA in its heyday in the early 80s. And it seemed like you woke up one day, you saw those guys in the AWA, and then the next day they were all in the WWF. And
That's certainly the way it happened. Yeah, it was very
yeah,
unexpected.
yeah. And I was really amazed that I read some of your bio from your website. You started that fan or that report, excuse me, when you were about 14 or 15 years old.
Yeah.
And that's pretty amazing that you had that kind of talent and that much, I guess, passion for the business to start doing that and be successful at it. I mean, that's pretty amazing. I mean, you said you got the Hulkamania bug. Was there any other stars, maybe in AWA or up in Canada with Stampede Wrestling or anything that kind of inspired you to do that?
Well, I guess first off, I always wanted to be a writer. So by grade 7, grade 8, I knew I was going to be a writer. I worked on a novel that is embarrassing now to look at, but that was grade 8 kind of thing. And so I knew I wanted to write. And so that led me to newspapers, which led me, and all those things intertwine, right? You do your newsletter, and then I did the school newspaper, and I did a year at the Kitchener-Waterloo Record. So all these things sort of all fit together nicely. And wrestling just happened to be one of the things I wrote about. I was much more passionate about wrestling then than I am now.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's sort of like a job, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't need to watch it as much as I used to back then.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, with Stampede, you learn to love guys like Owen Hart and Makan Singh, who was Mike Shaw. You certainly, I mean, the AWA, we got some of it, and it was unique because they would film some of the extras in Winnipeg and insert them into the TSN show. So there was some Canadian content. Yeah. So we got some matches that didn't get aired in the regular AWA territory. Yeah, I mean, I always liked Rick Martel. And then, of course, once we learned about the NWA and I learned about tape trading and found some of those friends, we'd be getting the pay-per-views and all those things too, because that's also another key is Canada was about 5 or 6 years behind the US before we got pay-per-views.
Oh,
so you had to find somebody that had a satellite dish to be able to see the latest NWA pay-per-view or the latest from the WWF.
Yeah. Did not know that. Very interesting.
Well, it's a market thing, right? I mean, if there's 250 million people in the US, there's 25 million in Canada. Like, what's the point of doing all the infrastructure for that few people?
Yeah. Well, now we got the internet, right?
We do, and so you can order those hard to find Doritos or Mountain Dew ones that you can't get in Canada. You can get them up here if you really, really want them. And I'm not speaking personally. I'm just saying those are examples.
That's the saying. So you've written quite a few books, 17 from what I've counted, and you've got another one in the works.
Well, there's 2 in the works, but
okay.
But before all that, I mean, it's important to mention that I worked at the Toronto Sun for 5 years.
Okay.
And it was one of the biggest newspapers in Canada at the time and really important. And it connected me with many people at the other Sun newspapers, right? It was a chain. Mm-hmm. When they decided to start a website, and this was, 1995, it was groundbreaking for a newspaper to have an idea to do a website. The powers that be, the elf lords, as they were called, they had this idea that they could make a portal, right? And now we think nothing of that, but that was pretty revolutionary at the time. It was a place where you could go get all the newspapers, and they made lots of different partnership deals. What that meant, though, was there was a Bret Hart wrestling column in the Calgary Sun. There was a Cyrus was doing a column in the Winnipeg paper. There was Mr. X in the Ottawa paper, and in Toronto there was a wrestling column too. So we had wrestling content all of a sudden.
Yeah,
we needed a home, so we built Slam Wrestling as a part of Slam Sports, and it just grew from there. And we started doing content and doing original stories. Not long after the website launched in March '96. I mean, I did the first wrestling related interview with The Rock. He was, standing at Skydome in Toronto at the back when they introduced Tiger Ali Singh. One of those second generation guys went on to be a bigger star.
Yeah. I think we know which one.
Yeah, exactly. Well, technically he's a third generation, but yeah, you get the idea. So slam wrestling is really the reason I'm where I am today, in the sense that I gained a reputation that way.
Mhm.
And so ECW Press approached me, Michael Holmes, the editor there, and said, "Hey, you ever thought about doing a wrestling book?" And I thought about it for a couple of minutes and said, "Yeah, there needs to be something about Canadian wrestlers." And
Mhm.
that led to the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, the Canadians.
Mhm.
That got read by Steve Johnson. And then all of a sudden I have a writing partner who, he's a decade older than me. So it was challenging. It was great because he made me work harder. I really honed my skills working with Steve. And now I find myself sharing a lot of that knowledge with my young writers at Slam. It's hard to identify sometimes when they're, you know, 30 years younger than you, but what are you going to do? You got to do it, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I read your bio on your website. You and I only about 2 months apart. I was born in November of 70, and if that's right, February of 71. So you just
Yeah, it's not a work. That one's legit.
okay. So we're only a couple months apart. That was pretty interesting. So the Slam Wrestling website, I started looking through it. You got a lot of great information in there about wrestling, and the one that really struck me was this deal with Greg Gagna and those figures. Um, I mean, how did you get approached about doing that, or did you reach out to them, or how did that work?
Well, the best way to describe it is, wrestling's been my beat for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you get to know people, and you never know how things are going to be interconnected in your life. And that goes for all of life, right?
Right.
Every job I've had stems from that lucky break I got to start at the Toronto Sun Library.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever, a lot of freelance stuff comes out of there. Everything over the years, it's I can really tie it all back to there. So wrestling's not all that different. You get to know people, you make friends, you go to connection, you go to conventions, right? So at the
Right.
Colorful Alley Club, I met John Arezzi, and I end up doing John Arezzi's book. And then John Arezzi, introduces me to Medusa. And so that's my next wrestling book coming out, is working with Medusa, Alundra Blaze, on her book. And of course, I've learned a lot about monster trucks there too. But however, at some point, she'd been approached by Greg Gagne as a part of this Power Town line of a figure. So I'd already met Greg. I knew Greg. And so we started trying to find all that out. And it just turned out, I have the confidence at this point where maybe a new writer wouldn't. I'd be able to say to Greg, I want the exclusive on this. When you're ready to go live, let me know. I've got the platform. Let's share it. It was our top story by far last week. Still getting good traffic. People are fascinated by it. And and there's tons of figures out there already. So it's obviously there's a market there that I maybe didn't understand myself, but obviously I've come to understand it.
Yeah, no, I talked to him. Him and I are good friends. I did a podcast about a year ago, and so he told me about it back in, I don't know, I want to say September, October, kind of the idea, the concept. And when I saw your story, I thought it was great, and I'm so glad that they're finally getting it off the ground and launching this, because it's way overdue in my opinion. And also, I was going to tell you, Medusa, I met her at Crusher Fest in Milwaukee back in October, and fantastic lady.
She's a character and a half.
She is.
It's been a wonderful trip getting to know her. The number of times she said, my husband doesn't know this one, but, and then she'll launch into another story. I think her husband, Alan's going to probably knock his socks off when he actually reads the book. But there's so much to her life and so many facets. The wrestling, again, was almost the least interesting part. Like, I wanted to learn about it and know more about it, but I was intrigued by the monster trucks. And then when you learn her personal story about her upbringing and how difficult it was, and some of the other trials and tribulation of her life, it makes it a much better book. So much to pack in there. Whereas the other book I'm working on at the moment is with former Toronto Blue Jays manager John Gibbons.
Okay.
And like, that's going to be a great mainstream book and get lots of attention, but it doesn't have all the nuance and the wackiness and all that stuff that Medusa's book does. It's just they're different businesses, right? They're different people. And it's, well, the one year they're hockey books. They're not necessarily what your audience is interested in, but I did a book about Father Bauer, who created the Canadian Olympic hockey program. So he was a priest who coached hockey. And then that same year, I did a book about Gilles Graton, who they called Gratuny the Looney, who was this wild, nutty WHA goalie. He had no filter. He told me all these stories. So if anything, I was walking stuff back. And you know what? We're not going to put that in the book, and we're not going to name names. So I did, you know, the God and the Devil in the same year is the books coming out. So that's a little bit with the Medusa book and the John Givens book coming out at the same time. So yeah, they're just very different personalities, but that's part of the challenge, right?
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, you do it. You've done a lot of different books, mainly on hockey and wrestling. I saw a children's book, I believe you did a while back.
Well, yeah. So my son is 15 now and taller than me and starting to work out for football. So we got to watch out for that.
Yeah.
But he was coming to all these events with me when I was selling books, right? So we'd go to a hockey card show to sell books. And so we just decided one day, let's create a book together. And so we came up with Duck with a Puck, and he got to go out and do some publicity. And, you know, we were on like a breakfast television show together, and like absolutely golden memories for him and I to do together. And then I did another kid's book called Santa's Day Job, which again, I was a stay-at-home dad. So I knew what these kids were reading. Other kids would give me ideas.
Yeah.
All those things sort of add up. And then the other one, the most recent one, besides Arezi's Matt Memories book I mentioned, was I did a biography on an old actor named Billy Van, who was on, you know, Sonny and Cher.
Yeah.
He was here in Canada. He was best known for, you know, the hilarious House of Frightenstein and Party Game, but he was on all kinds of stuff. I mean, he was the guy who organized the singers to do the Spider-Man theme song. You know, Spider-Man.
Oh, okay.
So it's often miscredited that he did it because it's the Billy Van singers. Well, Billy Van organized it, but he's not actually on there singing. I know that because I talked to his ex-wife and his ex-sister-in-law, and they clarified all that. So that, again, was a fascinating world. But to me, writing is writing. And you can dig stuff up. And once you're comfortable with yourself and interviewing people, I can do just about anything these days.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I mean, you got to be really good at task organizing, because you said you've done 2 books at the same time. That would just drive me nuts. I couldn't keep track of what was what. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, well, again, it goes back to the Toronto Sun. Like, I spent 3 years working in the library there. And so I really learned then how to organize things. But I guess it was always like that, right? I had clipping files when I'm a teenager, and I still have them with some of the old wrestling stuff. So people often joke about, well, how can you do some of these obituaries so quick? Well, I've been organized my entire life. So I have a file, I have lots of clippings. I can generally find what I need pretty quickly and put something together.
I mean, that's pretty amazing that you can write 2 books simultaneously. I mean, I could never do that, but
they're at different stages, which helps a lot. The Medusa book was definitely well in hand before I accepted the John Givens job.
Yeah, I mean, that's just something, me personally. I interviewed another author. I don't know if you know Kenny Casanova.
Yeah, of course. He's a little bit more lively than I am.
He is, but he told me about some books he wrote simultaneously, and I just was in awe about how you could do that. I guess it's kind of like schoolwork, right? You got different subjects, you got to get it all done at the same time sometimes. So I don't know.
The writing is actually the easy part. I mean, it's the interviewing and the transcribing.
Yeah.
It's the research, like all that takes a lot more time. The writing, I can just go up into my office, and I purposely have an office where my computer's offline, so I can't get distracted. I just up there, and I basically just use, you know, Microsoft Word, and I write and turn up the music. So that works perfect for me. Might not work out like that for everybody. I can't work in a coffee shop kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that'd be a little too distracting. I understand that. So out of all the books you have written in wrestling, let's say the first part, what has been the most rewarding book that you've written on the wrestling side for you personally?
Rewarding is a whole different word, right? I mean, the Benoit book we did, which was a quickie book, it was a true crime book, came out almost right away with Steve Johnson and Heath McCoy and Irv Muchnick and I. That sold the most, so that's rewarding. But then again, it's divided 4 ways, so that changes things. Rewarding. That's such a fascinating word. Well, I guess the rewards come when you hear things like uh, Rocky Johnson's wife told me after he got the Canadians book that he stayed up all night reading it. And that's a wonderful little memory. Bobby Heenan told us that he kept the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, the tag teams, in his bathroom. It's like, that blows your mind, right? It's like, here's Bobby Heenan on the bath, on the toilet. That's all you need to know right there. And he's got my book.
Yeah.
It didn't say if it was toilet paper or not, but those kind of things, even just the back and forth. I mean, finally getting to meet Jim Cornette, and he signed the tag teams book, and something about really for the Midnight Express or whatever number they're at. Like, there's all those rewards that are just irreplaceable, and but then you hear from the fans too, the same way, right?
Yeah.
And family members saying, we really appreciate that you memorialize these guys, right?
Yeah.
And it's different being in a book than on the web. There's still no comparing to it.
Yeah.
And I'm not knocking all the great journalism that goes on the web, but there's also a lot of things that is not journalism on the web. And it makes it tougher to do my job sometimes.
Yeah. No, I understand that. On the hockey side, you've written several books. In fact, you got an award from what I read last year.
Yeah, it was the it was the President's Award from the Society for International Hockey Research, which is pretty great. I just really believe in what those guys are doing. Yeah. And we've never quite organized the same way with wrestling historians that we have with hockey. Yeah. And that's probably okay. I mean, wrestling itself is not as organized as hockey.
Yeah.
But I mean, we have a fellowship with other historians, right? Yeah. Whether it's in hockey, whether it's in wrestling. I've laid out like probably 40 different books over the years. So you learn a guy like J. Michael Kenyon, who's a famous wrestling historian, but he was also a basketball historian. And so he helped me, get to know some of the Association for Professional Basketball Researchers. And those guys helped me with this Total Basketball book that we did. So there's like-minded people, and it takes a certain kind of person to really research, not a mass, to research. And there is a difference, right? Some guys are collectors, and they love to share and show what they have. But other people really like to dig and get their hands dirty and ask a lot of questions. And those are different things, but they're very much complementary, and we need each other, right? I need those guys that do all the collecting because they help me, look through things and dig further.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, no, you are very in depth on your books. I've looked through a few of them there, and they are quite well researched, and yeah, it's very interesting.
But everything, it's just like anything in life, right? Everything builds on each other, right? My Canadians book is not as good as the storytellers, the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, the storytellers. Yeah. Like I remember my editor sent me a note after he got it, and he said it was probably the best written pro wrestling book he'd ever gotten. Like, just quality of the writing and all that. Yeah. And that's hugely complimentary to me, but I also know we did a hell of a lot of work on it. There's so many people and subjects that are tackled in there that don't get talked about anywhere else. I mean, who else writes about, wrestling on the radio? That used to exist. Yeah. We don't even think about that. Podcasting is supposed to be so revolutionary. Well, okay, wrestling's been on the airwaves a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, since what, probably the 30s, 40s, whatever.
The 30s, yeah. In fact, Bill Mercer, who's still alive, who was the voice of world-class championship wrestling, he started calling wrestling matches on the air. I think it was in Muskogee. Yeah, if I remember correctly. So, I mean, it's just fascinating that the pro wrestling business has been around this long and continues to thrive. And we might be at an apex now where there's so much content out there that it'll never be the same again. Like it almost seems like there needs to be contraction. Because there's just too much.
Yeah. I think right now, I mean, I don't watch it a lot as much as I used to, kind of like you stated earlier, but it's not just WWE anymore as the main hub. You have the AEWs, the Ring of, or Impact Wrestling. and some indies, and some indies are even starting to come out of the woodwork and get some national exposure. I think it's good in a way because it kind of makes you get different content. And I don't know how you feel about that. How do you, I mean, you kind of said it's kind of getting overdone, but
Well, yeah, maybe not overdone, but there's something for everybody out there.
yeah.
And as a mainstream website that's been around, 25 years,
Mhm.
we have to really pick and choose. It's not our job to include everything.
Right.
And so, yeah, we may feature a death match here and there. That doesn't mean we're going to do death matches all the time.
Right.
You cover the mainstream stuff, but you also want to include that profile on the guy who was an enhancement talent,
Mhm.
or, some woman that's been completely forgot about, or the little people.
Mhm.
We don't deal in just rumors like so many sites, right? That are
Right. Yeah.
more interested in some cryptic tweet that some guy posted than actually doing the work and talking to somebody.
Mhm.
And interviews are certainly the core of our site.
Yeah.
And I just love doing interviews, talking to people, and the secondary quotes are almost as important.
Mhm.
So like with the story that went up today was on Luke Hawx and his work with the Stars show Heels. And for that, I talked to a couple of different people, including his son, but they all interweave somehow, right? So talking to Jay Spade, who's one of the guys who's on the show, also gets me talking to other guys. I just love that aspect of the business, right? That you're building your Rolodex, to use a really old term, but that's exactly it, right? Life is about who you know. It's about contacts. It's being able to call in favors. It's about them reaching out when they need something and say, hey, I've got this great idea. What can we do? So you get that with the smaller promotions.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they're all good at publicity.
Right.
For everyone that's good, like, AEW is okay, and Impact, WWE doesn't need us. They don't think they need us anymore.
Mhm.
And that's fine. That's their decision.
Mhm. Do you and I grew up in the territory era. Do you think that's a missing component of today's wrestling? Because back in the 80s, our era, when we were teenagers, you got the magazines and you had all these different stories about the territorial system. They were part of the NWA or whatever, but you could see Southeastern wrestling or Continental, Mid-South. Now you don't really see that too much. Do you think that's kind of a missing component even for writers today covering wrestling?
Well, I don't think it's truly gone away. Like,
Okay.
it's still there today. So again, using the Luke Hawx and Jay Spade example, I mean, Jay was mentioning how tough it is to get noticed because he's based in New Orleans. Their Wildcat Wrestling promotion is very successful, drawing, a couple thousand people to shows. So they don't run all the time, but they have a television component or a web component. So they exist down there in that world. For those guys to get noticed, they got to go somewhere else, right? To get that next step. Here in Ontario, there's all kinds of guys, but nobody knew who Josh Alexander was until he got to Impact Wrestling. And he made this huge impact, every pun intended. And but I mean, that's the way it's got to work, right? You need that break. You need that guy to believe in you, or that woman to believe in you and bring you to the next step. So there's those pockets all across the country. And, even like Mexico, sort of a territory, right? You're bringing guys up. But that's us just being simplistic, right? Mexico's got different territories. There's different guys that work Tijuana than work down in Mexico City, that are different than down in Monterey. Japan, same thing, right? You've got all the different levels. So I think the territory system still exists, but because nobody really runs territories, they're not running a dozen different cities over the course of 2 weeks. It doesn't feel like a territory.
I guess what I'm kind of implying also is that, the territory days, if you had, I don't know, let's just say Ray Stevens or a crippler, he could be in Georgia for a few months, then they kind of write him out, but then he'd show up in Mid-Atlantic right? And it was kind of a smooth transition. He'd still be on TV. There's more exposure because they were all kind of connected. Now it's WWE, and then you got to change your name if you go to AEW, because you can't be, unless it's your real name, you
Right.
can't be Diesel, okay, or Razor Ramon like they had, and then they go to WCW back in the 90s and they had to use their real names because it was a copyright infringement. That's what I'm kind of
But on
implying.
that aspect, I mean, you're talking about all these little places that are stepping up, right? Defy out in Seattle, right? And they run the Pacific Northwest. I mean, they're bringing in all these talent from all these different spots, right? And they may be doing one shots, but then they start to come back and it becomes sort of a regular spot. The problem really is, though, that nobody is running regularly, right?
Yeah.
Even the major promotions, nobody's running house shows
Right.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Yeah.
So when there's the occasional thing like a tour of the Maritimes in Canada in the summer, where all the arenas, they take the ice out so they can run the arenas, or when a guy like a Danny Duggan, who's based out of Winnipeg, will do a tour of Western Canada, and he'll hit a show, a town every show or every day. Those are wonderful opportunities for wrestlers to learn and get better. And there just isn't enough of that anymore. Back in our day, if you were a wrestler, meant you made a living wrestling and just really wrestling. Today, you're a wrestler. Yeah, you work Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but you make your money selling merch or pimping yourself out on OnlyFans or whatever it is. And that's fine. Those opportunities didn't exist back in the 1980s. Right? You could have had a Fabulous Moolah OnlyFans channel. It could have been something.
Yeah.
You just let's be realistic. But like, so the things change, and that's fine, right? Yeah. Merch is so much easier to do now than it used to be.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a lot more streamlined and faster. Yeah, I agree. So I know you're working on this Medusa book. Is there anything else you're working on?
There's always 1,000 things. There is a really good story that's in with Sports Illustrated that I can't really talk about at the moment.
Okay.
But it's wrestling related. It's gonna shake some tail feathers. The Medusa book has been great. What's beyond that, I don't know. We've been mulling Monster Truck book because there's never been a book for adults on monster trucks.
Well, there you
Isn't
go.
that insane? Like, remember how Mick Foley's book really changed the game because it became a bestseller. He wasn't the first wrestling book. He wasn't the best wrestling book, but he was the right wrestling book at the right time that made the bestseller list that all of a sudden opened the door for all these other books that are out there. And, you know, a good couple of dozen of them probably didn't need to ever be out there, but they are, and that's fine. And it helps us as historians and fans to fill in a lot of gaps in what happened out there, and some of them are even true.
Yeah. So you said you catch some wrestling. Is there a promotion right now that you think is really stepping up, in your opinion?
I really like just following along with my website, right? And I deal with the readers, my writers, and I know what they're writing about. So I sort of follow that way. I'll flip on AEW here and there, WWE maybe a little bit. I got into the NWA. I was lucky to go down while working on Medusa's book. I went down and spent 4 days at the NWA tapings in Atlanta. 3 of those days were backstage because she was producing. So I got to experience what she did to be able to include that in the book. But I really became a fan of what they're trying to do. And it's sort of what we remember it to be. It's the studio wrestling idea. It's stars, but they're also still grounded. They're not out there trying to become, you know, superstars and all these kind of things. They're out there just because they want to wrestle. And I have mad respect for what Billy Corrigan and Pat Kenny and Kyle Davis and all them are doing. And I wish them all the best. And the Crockett Cup's coming up for them, and that's pretty exciting too. And that's a throwback, right? I remember how exciting that Crockett Cup was back when they first launched, because you're trying to figure out who are these teams. You know, these are fascinating.
Yeah, I remember that. I actually went to the NWA 70 event in Nashville 4 years ago now, almost.
Okay.
Really, all those guys, they had a little ordeal before the event happened in a separate building. They had a bunch of those wrestlers in there, take a picture with them, get their autograph. Really down to earth guys and women. Would talk to you, wouldn't like try to push you away or anything, like they ain't got time or they want to get along with their sell you your merchandise. They never pushed anything, which was great. And because my wife is not a big fan, I'll be honest with you, but she went with me and she actually enjoyed it. So I agree. The NWA is doing something different. It's unfortunate that COVID had hit and kind of put them back some with, because their YouTube series and what they were doing was strong, I thought, and was going places.
I'll date myself. I was at the NWA 50th anniversary.
Okay.
In Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and that was probably one of my greatest wrestling memories too. It was like, on that day, you're an interviewer from Harley Race to Killer Kowalski to Missy Hyatt to Todd Gordon, who of course started ECW. There were people there I knew, like Luthez and Tiger Ali Singh was there. They had a lot of those developmental guys. I look back and how fantastic a day it was to be there for that event. That's also one of those, that was a famous event too, because that's the one where Steven Regal was a little bit too messed up to perform. Steve Williams was there. Like, again, I've had so many wonderful opportunities through wrestling and met a lot of great people. A few people I don't like, but that's life.
That's life. Yeah.
But the fact is, I'm a journalist, and you try to deal with everybody. You try to be fair with everybody, and you're never going to please everybody. No. That's the reality. That's
life, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm going to WrestleCon down in Dallas here in about 3 weeks at the end of the month here in March. Are you having anything down there? Do you got any thing going?
We're waiting for a confirmation for a writer for Mania that he'll be there as media, because there's got to be I don't know what the best way to describe it is. At this point, after 25 years of running a site, we should be able to get into events, and we do. Yeah. And so WrestleMania, we're just waiting for confirmation on that. So it'll be very interesting for sure. It's always an exciting time. It's funny, my brother's a big basketball guy, and he's going to one of the days of the Final Four in New Orleans. Oh, wow. And I said, well, I can't come join you because that's WrestleMania weekend. That's always my busiest weekend. Yeah. So we're waiting to hear for our photographer, and our writer's going to get in. Okay. We'll get details. We'll have stories there. Maybe you can contribute for me, Brian. I'm
going to WrestleCon.
It's all right. It's all good.
And I'm going
to know all those guys too. Michael Buccini, all of them, the High Spots guys.
I am looking forward to it. I've never been. I mean, right now, I just went on the site there. I already bought my ticket and all that stuff. But right now, they got over I think they got 110 people lined up right now, and they're still adding people every day. And I'm pretty excited about it. I know a few of the guys. I'll have to just shake hands a lot of times. I can't afford those prices on those autographs and those pictures, but
yeah, that does become, well, then again, I've been privileged to be able to experience, these guys in different settings, right? Going for beers or, so sitting down in the bar with, Stan Hansen and his son and Barbara Goodish. So Frank, Goodish is widow, Bruiser Brody. So that can be surreal, right? Or you're sitting having a hot dog with Ken Patera in Vegas at the Cauliflower Alley Club. Yeah. Those opportunities are just magical. WrestleCon was up here in Toronto. They ran one up here. And my staff helped staff it, right? You've never been to one of these events. You'll see they need a lot of volunteers, even if they just stand there with the wrestler and collect the tickets. Yeah. And so my Slam staff did that, and we had wonderful opportunities to hang out, do all these things. And then we ran a breakfast as a fundraiser for the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. Okay. That was our 5th Titans in Toronto dinner. But I mean, talk about memories, like Bruno Sammartino telling me, please make sure that the Wolfman Willie Farkas and Sweet Daddy Siki both come out to see me. So I made sure both those guys got out to see Bruno when he was in town. That's great. That's magical, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Another Titans dinner I ran in Toronto, Dominic DiNucci got to see his original partner, Dino Bravo. This is the original Dino Bravo from the 50s. It was
Okay.
Dino and Dominic Bravo, and they hadn't seen each other in 35 years. And it's like,
Wow.
I made that happen. I got them together.
Yeah.
So I'm truly blessed.
Yeah. No, it was amazing. You talk about meeting people. I had the opportunity. I stay at the same hotel as like Medusa, Bischoff, Greg and Jim Brunzel, and Kenny J. And I'd already talked to Greg and Jimmy before, but we met up that night after the first event and sat around and had some beers and ate some food, and it was wonderful. I mean, it was just great talking. They're just like normal people, but at first you're kind of starstruck. I was like, I'm sitting around with these legends and they're just talking to me like I've known them for 20 years. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed
That's
it.
exactly it. They're people too.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I remember the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame when it was in Amsterdam, New York, right? I'd come down for breakfast and Paul Orndorff is sitting by himself. Well, I just go over, introduce myself, we sit down and you talk about non-wrestling stuff, right? It's just life. In Iowa at one of those events, my dad and I went and we sat down with Nikita Koloff and his dad. So, it's not just about wrestling. It's these guys are real people. You find out about them, their personal lives, their kids. I just enjoy wrestling people in general because they tell good stories.
Yeah.
And they often don't have a filter. And they never, and compared to the hockey guys, right, who always had a general manager or a coach that made sure they got back to the hotel by 11:30. The wrestlers didn't have that. So they lived a completely different life.
Yeah.
A lot more debauchery, for sure. Some of it which can't write about, obviously, but
yeah,
that's part of the fun.
Yeah, it is. All right, sir. Mr. Greg Oliver, thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it. I know you're a busy man. And folks, if you haven't read some of his books, you really need to. He's a great writer, and he's been doing this for a long time, and a true wrestling fan and hockey fan.
So slamwrestling.net.
Slamwrestling.net.
Is the website, but oliverbooks.ca is where you can find all my books, descriptions, links to buy them, and my wife's book. My wife wrote Bang Your Head, the biography of Dewey Robertson, the missing link.
Okay.
So it's a pretty wild life we've led over the years. So we just passed Dewey's birthday would have been 83. So we have a lot of fond memories of him too.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. Well, again, folks, Mr. Greg Oliver, sir, thank you for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.
And folks, we'll talk to you soon.